That's about it. So, like I said, we will review the questions as they come in. You'll have your opportunity to ask them. A combination of the counselors and city staff will attempt to answer them to the best of their ability. And if something doesn't get asked, or you would prefer to know a little bit more information about something, of course, you can always get in touch with any of the offices of the counselors after this meeting is over and ask your questions that way. We're always happy to field your questions there and do our best to supply you with the information that you need. All right. With that said, we've got the counselors for wards 7, 8, and 9 here tonight, Teresa Kavanaugh, Lane Johnson, and Sean Devine. And we're going to start the evening with a few opening remarks from each of the counselors. And so why don't we go in ward order? Counselor Kavanaugh.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for being a moderator tonight. Looks like we have a great crowd showing up. This is wonderful. And of course, we should give land acknowledgements as well for this unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. So thanks to everyone. Yeah, it's going to be a good discussion. I know that there's a lot of pending concerns in all wards, and we'll have an opportunity to talk about what's going on. Anyway, you can explain, Tim, the process of when you ask questions, because I see hands up already. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so I'll go next. It's Lane Johnson here from College Ward. Thank you so much for joining today's budget deliberations. We look forward to this time all year, but of course there's many opportunities to speak at committee and council throughout the year that inform the budget consultation. So I hope that if you are interested in pursuing any of these topics further, that you'll reach out to our office at collegeward@ottawa.ca, and we can plug you into the right committee where your particular area of interest will be coming up between now and the end of the year. We're always here to facilitate, more direct public engagement and FaceTime that isn't as easy to do in these types of sessions. So thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. My apologies for leaving you hanging there. Councillor Devine, you're up next.
Thank you, Tim. Also, thank you to my colleagues, and thank you to senior staff for being here tonight. I'm really excited to see such a large crowd, and very grateful for this kind of civic engagement. So I'm here to listen tonight more than to speak. However, if any of my Ward 9 residents listening do want to know my positions on various things, I've been pretty transparent about it in my newsletter. So whether you subscribe to my newsletter yet or not, you'll find all of my thoughts on budget 2025 there, where we're headed. And what I'm looking to hear from residents tonight is when we get to the questions, I guess what I'm most interested in hearing is what is it that you are looking for in our 2025 budget, and what choices are you willing to make to get to where you want to see us go? That's what I'll have my ear tuned on tonight. So thank you very much, and I hope we have a great meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. All right. We're going to move on to the presentation about the budget process for this year. But again, just to reiterate, because I see that there's one question already in the comments, we'll be fielding questions through the Q&A function, through the chat. So you'll see at the top of your screen, if you're using a computer, you'll see it there, either or probably on the side, depending on what kind of device you're using. But there is a Q&A button. If you press that, that will allow you to enter a question into the Q&A. They come in order. We'll be doing our best to sift through them and ask the questions as they come in. And when there are repeated questions, we'll do our best to collate them as we go along. Okay. But yes, do feel free to add your questions to the Q&A. And just one of the reasons we do this is it allows us to get to more questions. One of the challenges, obviously, of having questions asked live is that we can't get quite as many of them out. that way. But this way, people can get their questions down. All of the questions are recorded. We can see the themes that are developing. We can answer some of them here, but if there are things that need to be revisited, it gives us a chance to look at that after the fact and provide answers to those things. So I appreciate you doing that. You're free to enter questions at any time into the Q&A. Sometimes it's helpful to do it as the presentation is going. If there's something in particular that catches your interest, feel free to enter it, but you can enter a Q&A at any time through the process. All right, and with that, thank you again for taking your time out of your evening to join us tonight, and I want to thank Cyril Rogers for doing that this evening. This is a busy season for our Chief Financial Officer. Spends a lot of time in meetings with a lot of different resident groups talking about the budget. But you're lucky to get the first version of Cyril tonight. This is his first budget meeting for the season. So we'll turn it over to Cyril to give the first run through of the budget process for this year. Thanks again for coming out tonight, Cyril.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Councillor Devine, Kavanaugh, and Johnson, and welcome residents of the respective wards. So you guys are lucky, I guess. Maybe you're lucky, maybe you're not, but you get me fresh. This is the first one of the season. It's the time of year where I like to say it's the most wonderful time of year from a budget perspective, because we're literally in a deep dive process of the next 6-7 weeks of the next pressure that we have for our budget. So you can move into the next slide. So tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide an overview of different aspects of our budget, budget basics from a municipal perspective, talk a little bit about the council endorsed budget process and the directions, and then at the end, we'll leave it up for questions. I am joined with several other finance staff as well to support in any Q&A at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So the first section is basically, I'm going to provide a little bit of an overview in terms of the Municipal Act and balancing the city's budget. Give a little bit of a background in terms of when we talk about operating budget and capital budget, to kind of give a little bit of nuance in terms of what that means and in more tangible examples for what you see as a resident. Talk about the funding sources. This is very complex, but I'm trying to kind of simplify it the best that I can. And then also talk about the various budget levies that we have at the City of Ottawa, and also touch on some other components in terms of the revenue sources that we have that we bring into the system to pay for all the services that we provide here at the City of Ottawa. Next slide, please. So one of the fundamental basics of the Municipal Act and the city budget and municipal budgets overall is we are required to have a balanced budget. So what that really means is all of our expenditures, so all of our costs going out the door needs to equal an equal source of revenue coming into the door. So unlike our federal and provincial colleagues above us, they can budget for deficits. Municipalities cannot do that. So again, when we table our budget, and you'll see in the documents, all the expenditures in the budget must equal all the revenues in the budget. So we need to ensure that it's a 1-for-1 overall when we table that budget. Next slide, please. On this slide, I'm going to give you some examples of when we talk about our budget overall, the $5+ billion budget that we have at the City of Ottawa. We kind of break it down into the operating side of the budget and also the capital side of the budget. From an operating budget, this would be our day-to-day expenditures, so mainly our staff costs, cost to deliver winter operations, repair potholes, maintenance in our parks, fire paramedic services, all recreational programs, so our camps, swimming lessons, ice rentals, ice maintenance, all of our utilities and fuel, all the materials and supplies, et cetera. So all city fleet, the cost that it takes to maintain and operate those units is what we would consider operating costs. And these are expenditures that occur on a daily and annual basis. From a capital budget perspective, these are larger type investments, and investments such as buildings, our roads resurfacing, large infrastructure type investments that would benefit over a long period of time. So if we build the building, as an example, the new Riverside facility going into the Riverside ward, that facility will have a life of 30 to 40 years. So that's considered a capital investment. So we can have different funding sources that we can apply to that to pay for that. it's almost like having a mortgage on your home. So it's an asset that will have lots of life, and we amortize that, depreciate that over the life of the asset. Next slide, please. Funding sources. So on the left side of the equation, this is all the different operating sources. So what I'll draw your attention to here is the property taxes and the payment in lieu of taxes. So combined, that's approximately 50% of the revenue that comes into the city. So these are all your residential, commercial property taxes that you pay. So 50% of the revenue coming in comes from taxation, so property taxation. 21% comes from federal provincial grants. These are largely social service type programs that the City of Ottawa delivers on behalf of the province. I speak to this a little later in the other slides. Some of our other programs like paramedic services. So paramedic services is mainly funded 50% by the province and then 50% from the taxation base. We also have our fees and services charged. So these are your, what I deem as our user fees. So when you pay for your water bill, that will be considered a user fee. When you pay for a transit ride, that's considered a user fee. When you sign up for a program at the recreational facility, whether it be a swim lesson, a skating pass or whatever, that will be considered a user fee. So again, the majority, 50%, roughly the majority, comes from property taxation. And then the other part of the pie comes from various sources. On the right side of the slide, this is how we pay for our capital infrastructure. So again, how we pay for new roads, new buildings, sidewalks, infrastructure type investments. These are funded largely by reserves. So we have various reserves at the City of Ottawa that are restricted for certain uses. So from a water, wastewater, stormwater perspective, as an example, we have reserves exclusively for each of those services. So we contribute money into that account, and that account is then used to pay for water infrastructure, as an example. Development charges, these are charges that are paid by developers when they put in new subdivisions, new houses. So a component of that charge then goes into a separate account where we then pay for the infrastructure related costs of a new subdivision. So if a new subdivision goes up, they pay a fee for each house in that subdivision. Part of that money then is allocated to the roads infrastructure, the parks infrastructure, the water, wastewater infrastructure, et cetera, to pay for the costs of that development. Next slide, please. Again, we do have several levies. So the citywide, we do have 3 different levies in the city. We have a citywide tax levy. So this is the part of your tax bill. If you turn your tax bill around, you can see how it's broken out. The citywide tax component funds things like your winter operations, your recreational facilities, versus your transit services levy exclusively services the transit costs, much like the police services levy. We have a special levy for police services in which that levy is exclusively allocated to police services. So we can't take money from the police services levy and allocate to transit, nor can we take money from transit and allocate to police. So each of the respective levies are contained to that specific service. The rate supported budget, this is our water, wastewater, and stormwater part of the budget. Again, the money collected from those 3 services are exclusively funneled into that program. So we can't take money from the water revenue, the water user fees, and allocate to a police service or a transit service. Next slide, please. Again, some examples of the citywide tax supported budget I talked about earlier. So our roads, winter maintenance, parks, recreation facilities, libraries, public health, paramedics, etc. One little example to the left of the slide, as I mentioned previously on a couple slides back when I talked about provincial and federal funding, public health. So they are that budget is 75% funded by the province. 25% is funded from the citywide tax levy. So again, the transit levy, the police levy, or the rate supported revenues do not go into the public health 25%. That's funded from the citywide tax levy. Paramedics, another example, 50%, the majority of paramedic services, 50% is funded from the province, 50% is funded from the citywide tax levy. Community social services, these programs vary depending on the the service. So long-term care, housing, social services, they vary anywhere from 80, 90%, 60%, 40%, depending on the specific service and depending on the actual program. Next slide, please. Again, transit services, auto police services, the respective levy is restricted to that service. So again, the transit levy taxes that we collect is exclusively allocated to the overall cost of running the transit program. The city does have a fiscal framework. It's a council endorsed fiscal framework that states that fares recover 55% of the operating costs and the remaining 45% is covered through the transit levy. That is the target. That is not actually how it flows through from a cost recovery perspective. There are additional revenue sources that we do allocate to transit services as approved and directed by council, such as the provincial and federal gas tax revenues. On the police side of the equation, again, the police services budget falls under the authority of the police services board. That levy, the police levy, funds into the overall police program. Next slide, please. Rate supporter budget. So again, this is your water, wastewater, stormwater. This is basically the revenue that we collect from the use of those three different services is funneled right back into that program. It is a very capital intensive program. As you can imagine from our water infrastructure, our wastewater infrastructure, this is one of the more higher capital intensive programs in the city. A lot of the infrastructure is underground, so it costs much more to repair and install new infrastructure. So a large portion of these revenues funnel into the capital program for this service area. Next slide, please. Again, some examples of user fees and charges. So the municipalities are allowed to impose fees for charges to recover the cost of delivering certain services. Our transit fares is what we would consider user fees. All of our recreational programs, facility rentals, parking permits, etc., are all examples of user fees and charges. Next slide, please. Now the next section is going to move into a little bit more of the actual process behind the budget build, if you will. As I always say, the budget does not only begin in this time of year. The budget is pretty much a very 365-day process at the City of Ottawa. Residents can always provide feedback through their respective councillors and throughout the year at various committees that I'll speak to later in the presentation. The majority of the budget process is driven by decisions that occur throughout the year in terms of legislative reports and directions received from council, and that helps us build the direction into the budget process. Next slide, please. So again, we kicked off the formal part of the public engagement in the July timeframe. If you advance through a couple of weeks ago, the budget directions was endorsed and approved by council. That provided direction to staff now to go away and do the detailed process in terms of building the formal budget for tabling on November 13th, followed by after the tabling on the 13th, each respective committee budget will rise to that respective committee where residents come out and provide public delegations. And then finally at December 11th is when the final adoption day will be for the 2025 budget. Next slide, please. So a little bit of a recap in terms of the budget directions. So this year, starting from the left side of the screen, moving to the right. So the direction for all city services, excluding transit, is for a property tax levy of no more than 2.9%. So what that means is services, all the citywide services that I spoke to earlier, winter operations, recreational facilities, Ottawa Public Health, Ottawa Public Library, even the Ottawa Police Services levy be increased by no more than 2.9%. That's the council endorsed direction. From a transit perspective, the direction was more broad, and this relates back to the fairness campaign that is endorsed by council. So the direction is to develop a budget of a levy between 2.9% up to 37%. There's many other layers in terms of the fare box increases, cost containment strategies, other types of options that are being reviewed by the Long Range Financial Planning Working Group endorsed by the Mayor, Councillor Gower, Councillor Tierney, and Councillor Leeper. So that will be all compiled into the actual detailed documents on November 13th. The rate program, your water, wastewater, and stormwater, a combined increase overall 4.4%. User fees and charges to be increased to move towards cost recovery as per the Municipal Act. And then we also layer in any additional revenue type sources or efficiencies that we have found through the service review framework endorsed by this term of council. Next slide, please. Public engagement. So these are just some of the examples that we advertise in terms of engagement to the residents of Ottawa as we go through the budget process. We have various forums in terms of budget surveys, budget email address, various social media, public consultations, and then of course when we get into the actual tabling and committee reviews, that's another forum for public delegations throughout that committee process that you'll see in November. Next slide, please. So here's a little bit of a snapshot. The budget gets tabled on November 11th for citywide services. Ottawa Public Health and the library do go a little bit earlier. Public Health Board will present their budget on November 4th, the library on November 5th. Then all other city services will be tabled on November 13th. Following November 13th, the budget will move through a series of committee meetings and finally adoption on December 11th. Next slide, please. A little bit small. All the councillors do have this presentation, so you can reach out, or I'm sure they'll share this, but this is a good slide for reference. So what this does is we try to align the respective services to the respective committee. So each one of those committees across the top, they will have a respective budget that will go forward to that committee. And that's where residents have the opportunity to come out and speak as a public delegation. And below each of those committees is a list of some of the services, as an example, what you would see in that respective budget committee. So we do have a very detailed budget book. It is broken down by committee structure. And these respective services below the committee is what you would see in that respective committee budget. And that budget will be presented at each of those committee meetings. Once that budget is presented to those respective committees then either approve or disapprove or make changes, and then that would rise to council for adoption on December 11th. Next slide, please. Budget announcements. This term of council, the commitment has been put forward where each of the two previous budgets and now even this budget going forward, we're continuously trying to enhance the overall documents, budget literacy, simplify where we can the overall details that we do provide. New in the 2024 budget was a new online tool. What you will see in this budget will be an update to that online tool where it's been rebranded as a Budget Explorer. And it's really a more web-based, user-friendly tool to navigate the various budgets and committees and details at your fingertips. We're also adding more detail to the Budget Magazine, which was a new product introduced in the 2024 budget cycle. And we're continuously getting feedback and trying to make things more simpler and tangible for the residents to understand because it is a very detailed, complex budget. Next slide, please. Again, the term of council priorities, the budget, if you refer to the 2024 budget magazine, we are aligning investments to each of the 4 term of council priorities. As you go through that document, that magazine, you'll see icons reflecting each of the 4 different term of council priorities, where we're demonstrating investments into those priorities. A good example to reference in the 2023 and 2024 budget, we endorsed and included various investments from a climate change lens perspective, so that's now easily tangible to the budget process. And each of those 4 term of council priorities are referenced throughout the budget book. Next slide, please. And that concludes the formal presentation. So I'll pass it back to you, Tim, from the question perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, Cyril. That was quick and concise, and that's probably good because we've got the questions beginning to pile up in the Q&A. To remind people, because again, we've had quite a few people come into the room since we got going. What we're going to do, we've had the presentation from Cyril, some opening remarks from each of the councillors, and what we're going to do now is work our way through the Q&A. You can continue to add questions. I would suggest that you have a quick look through the Q&A before you post your question, because we are getting a few repeats, although that's not bad. That lets us know that certain things are on people's mind. Again, it's important to realize that one of the advantages of typing your questions into the Q&A is we have a record then of the things that people are asking, and we can get a sense of the kinds of things that are important to people. We'll work our way through the questions. I will do my best to get them all asked and answered. If for some reason we're not getting to your question or we're not answering it adequately, you're free to make note of that in the comment section. And never hesitate to get in touch with your counselor's office if you want to seek out more information or have a more fulsome discussion about it. The budget consultation process it takes weeks. It's several weeks. It's not just this one event. This is an event to try and give you a chance to get a bit of information, ask some key questions, and then we can provide you with those answers, and you can seek out more information through the city's website. You can provide more feedback through Engage Ottawa. There are many opportunities for you to provide that sort of feedback on this year's budget process. So we'll begin with the questions, and what I'll do is if the question is obviously addressed to someone, I will address the question to that person. If it's not addressed to anyone in particular, then I'll throw it out for general response, and the counselors or Cyril can jump in and provide whatever answer they wish. If more than one counselor wants to answer a question, of course, that's fantastic. I will try and stay alert and keep my eyes open to people wishing to do that. All right, with that in mind, we're not going to let Cyril rest just yet. We actually had a couple of questions right out of the gate that I would consider fall into more of a technical category, and so perfect for Cyril. The first of these, there's actually a couple of questions related to this, so I'm going to bunch these together, but it boils down to this. Why does the city budget not break down items further, such as new road construction? According to this questioner, it should list all the major road projects so we can question why we're spending money on certain projects. They want to be able to tell council what projects are important and which ones should be delayed and not done, so that we can spend more money on other critical budget items. And further to that, this person is also asking about more detail. Why is there not a breakdown of the revenue, as in property taxes? Of course, there are more categories of revenue than just property taxes, but that's the one this person is picking out. A breakdown of the revenue and expenditures by ward, so we can see who by ward is paying for what. So the first one is, why not more detail? Why not specific project by project itemization? And the second is, why not a ward by ward breakdown?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start off by, we do provide all the details by different road in the capital details. So I would state that the City of Ottawa's budget is probably one of the most detailed municipal budgets that I'm aware of, to the point where sometimes it gets confusing in terms of where to find the information. So if you're looking for specific roads type infrastructure, when you can reference the 2024 budget, or when the new budget gets tabled and the documents are provided in the online tool or via hard copy. If you go to the Transportation Committee section of the budget and you go to the capital component of that budget, you will see a list of every project that the city is investing in terms of transportation. And within there, you would see roads resurfacing program. That roads resurfacing program, as an example, tends to be between $60 to $90 million per year. And as you turn the pages for that program, you will see a list of all the respective roads that are planned to be captured as part of that overall funding. As you go through those details, you will also see investments in any significant infrastructure road that is planned for 2025. If you look at the 2024 budget as an example, you'll see a variety of different roads in that respective section of the budget. So all those details are captured there. When it comes to the second part of the question on the revenue, again, part of the problem is because of the details, it is there. If you look at the overall committee summary templates, you will see on one of the templates the overall property taxation revenue that we collect. We collect roughly around 2.1, 2.2 billion per year in property taxes, and that is broken out on the templates. You'll see in the lower part of the templates the different revenue sources. One of those is property taxes. The other ones you would see there are user fees, provincial revenue, etc. And then I think the last part of the question was in terms of the ward by ward breakdown. This one is very, very complex. I don't like to say impossible, but the reality is next to impossible to break that level of detail down because, and I'll use a very simplified example, and I hope this makes it understandable. If a winter operations truck is out clearing the roads during a storm, we call it beats. The city is, we break our network down into beats. That same operator could start off in Bell's Corners, go through Councillor Johnson's ward, come up through Baseline, connect in through Merivale Road, now into Councillor Devine's ward. So we can't track costs because we pay that employee. We pay for that unit that employee is driving, the snowplow truck. We cannot track cost when we cross over boundary lines, if you will, from a ward perspective. Another example would be recreational facilities. Obviously, a recreational facility serves much more of an area than just the actual ward. So breaking the cost of a recreational facility or an ice pad down to that exclusive ward is not accurate because there's many other people that come in from other wards to use that recreational facility. So two examples in terms of the complexities and the dynamics of trying to allocate costs down to the ward level.
Okay, thank you. Great comprehensive answer. We've got another questioner who is saying in their memory, they seem to recall that the province of Ontario used to spend, used to pay 50% of public transit costs. What percentage does the province, well, it says plan to pay going forward, but maybe there's two questions in there. What do they plan to pay going forward and what do they pay now is probably a question that's worth answering before trying to second guess what the government plans to do.
Yeah. So there is, again, a bit complex. I'll try and nuance it a little bit. So we do receive provincial gas tax revenue. So that is allocated to every municipality across the province from the provincial government. That is roughly around $38-39 million a year. So we do allocate that funding to transit, but that's a decision of this council in terms of that funding source. There is no, other than it's actually just over 20% of the contribution to stage 1 and stage 2 capital investment. There is no dedicated funding coming to transit from an operating perspective to fund the operating annual budget from the province. They do fund just over 20% of stage 1 and stage 2 capital infrastructure, but there's no dedicated revenue stream from the province exclusively for transit operating budget.
Okay, thank you for that answer. We've got a question about the Richmond Road renewal. Is it possible to increase the budget for the renewal of Richmond Road, Pinecrest to Bayshore, so that the late addition of required stormwater infrastructure does not cut back on any of the cycling facilities scoped in the functional design? Very specific question.
Yeah, it is specific. My answer is not going to be as specific because it's a little too specific. But the way we do our capital budget is really aligned to the transportation master plan and then aligned to the respective long-range financial plans and the development charge background study. If there's any shifts in that would have to flow through the TMP process in order for us to either advance or reprioritize, because the TMP actually identifies the prioritization. And when that timing comes, is contingent on how certain funding streams come in as per that prioritization process.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Kavanagh, you want to have a word on this?
Yeah, I just want to jump in that that's in Bay Ward, and this has been a long process. And yeah, we're frustrated that there's been compromises made to the cycle infrastructure based on the the work that has to be, the other work that has to be done, and we keep pushing back on that. It's just a frustrating exercise that obviously that kind of utility infrastructure needs to be done, but we want the best cycle infrastructure we can get. So we keep advocating for that. It's been a bit of a struggle. And this is what happens when a budget's allocated and it goes to a certain part, but not to the other. Yeah, so anyway, we continue to advocate for the safe cycling infrastructure because we want to get it right the first time.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Right, we have a question specifically for Councillor Devine. It says, Sean, I don't want to spend money on Lansdowne. I would rather put that money into things like the city food banks. The city budget survey was very limited in what we can offer as alternatives to what the proposed budget offers. I want more money directed to climate change, less for new roads. So not so much a question as it is a statement, but that's nonetheless, I'm sure you want to say something about that.
Well, I mean, generally, as Cyril made reference earlier, even when it comes to people identifying what it is that they want to see their tax dollars and their fees going to, as much as many councillors, myself included, might like to be able to take money from one department, one envelope, and put it into another, we often can't do that. So, for example, even if I had the capacity to say I'm not going to spend, let's say, any more money on Lansdowne, it doesn't mean that and Cyril, correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't mean that I could take money from Lansdowne and put it into food banks as much as I could. But what I appreciate about that kind of comment is more and more and more, it does help for councillors and senior staff to hear what our residents' overall priorities are, and that'll help us decide where we do allocate money. But thank you for registering the comment. The comment has been heard, and you are preaching to the choir.
All right. The next question has to do with our beaches and lifeguarding. So it says, across Ontario, according to the 2024 Ontario Drowning Report, 68% of drownings in Ontario occurred from May to September. Less than 1% of the drownings happen in a lifeguard supervised setting. What's in the 2025 budget for the lifeguarding season for Britannia Beach in 2025? Can it be extended to cover the period between the weekend of Victoria Day and the weekend of Labor Day? The evidence appears to show lifeguarding is the best tool to protect lives. Who wants to weigh in on this? Obviously, we might have more than one on that. So, Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Tim. Yes, and I'm aware that my colleague, Councillor Devine, has put in for an inquiry on this, and it has been responded to, and it outlines the costing. It's about money, but it's also beyond that, and it's also about getting lifeguards, which is not easy. They did do a comparison of other cities. It's an issue that's very sensitive, and it's been a tough summer when we had a child drowned. There's just nothing that you can say about money that will replace a child. I know that. That's a tough one. But overall, we have to look at what we can do to make it safer. And there has been suggestions in terms of Britannia Beach specifically. But anything we do in terms of lifeguarding would have to be for all 4 beaches. We're not, the focus became on Britannia, but there's other beaches as well. And we'll have to look at it all. I want to see more safety. And also awareness. I've talked to the paramedics. I've talked to the Life Saving Society. And education is super important, and that's something that was very much missing in some of the cases that happen. People do not realize how dangerous water can be, especially for non-swimmers. So there's much to be done, and this is from the experts, and that is continuing to happen in terms of the you know, an evaluation, particularly of Britannia Beach. And I know there's lots of controversy in terms of a drop off, and I have concerns about it as well. So this is what we have to work towards, is making people truly understand the dangers, and that supervision must be done at all times. And yes, lifeguards are ideal, but it's already been pointed out that's very difficult to have a season that goes from Victoria Day. And in some cases, people wanted it to go to Thanksgiving, which would be this weekend. That's a tough call. And with this 2.9% cap on a budget, I'd be hard pressed to see where it would come from, but we have to do better. And I think education is a good start.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Devine?
Thank you, Tim. And so I really do appreciate the question. And thanks for letting me speak to it. So I just wanted to let you know, this is a good question to let you know a little bit about the process of how we handle these things. So as Councillor Kavanaugh mentioned, several months ago, I submitted what is called an inquiry, where I basically present questions to senior staff and they give me a response to that inquiry. And that question was about how can the city improve supervised lifeguards on our outdoor beaches. And the response that I got from staff was very positive and encouraging, in that city staff recognize that there is a gap in our ability to provide enough lifeguard service during summers that are longer and hotter and so forth. And so just to let you know a little bit about the way it works. So city staff gave me back a response that listed out 3 options for a pilot project of how we could extend lifeguard services, and each of those options costs a certain amount of money. But the way it works, with the budget direction that every department has. So every department now has a budget direction to bring back budgets that are reflective of a 2.9% increase in taxes. And it is very hard for any department to build a budget with that cap on it that can see much growth or expansion of programs and services. And so the way it works is I will be presenting a budget motion that seeks to increase the budget for lifeguards by $60,000. Some say that's a lot, some say that's not a lot. But what then happens is council then debates whether or not to approve such a budget, because in order to have such a budget, we have to find a revenue source for it. So I just want to let you know a little bit about the process, the way things go, but also to let you know that there will be a budget motion coming seeking to address that gap, but only for a pilot project for 2025 if it passes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Devine. We've got a question specifically for Councillor Johnson. It's a nice general open one that says, what are the items that you would like to hear your ward residents' views on? Councillor Johnson, what are the issues that you're really seeking out resident input on?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. I'm trying to think of specific areas where I've kind of heard both sides of a particular issue, and it would be interesting to know in a grander way where people stand. So I guess I guess from some, residents of College Ward, I've certainly heard, that the underfunding of transit is a concern, and that that they hold us accountable for several terms of underfunding this service. I understand that without a doubt the numbers are so great that we absolutely require other levels of government, and some of the, shifting capital project costs have been picked up by the City of Ottawa in without the province and the federal government's funding things like cost escalations over a project's lifespan. So anyway, I understand that. But then I also now have residents who are telling me that they would be happy to pay a 10% tax increase, just as long as not $1 goes to OC Transpo, because the perception is that OC Transpo has so badly managed its portfolio that is why they are in the trouble that they're in. And I'm not certain that that's always the case. So, I've heard from both sides of the coin on that one. I also think for College Ward residents, it's important for me to understand how we perceive the relationship between revenue, like the city's revenues from existing property taxpayers and the potential for future property taxpayers. Because I do have some neighborhoods that, continue to let me know that they are very opposed to the idea of intensification. But of course, when we add more homes, we increase our revenue for the City of Ottawa without necessarily having to do that increase on the backs of existing taxpayers. So it is hard for me to understand sort of where to land on that sometimes as a counselor, because I certainly understand that people are struggling for affordability right now, but I also understand that we're not keen on the idea of our neighborhoods changing. So that ends up being, a bit of a tricky one for me as well. So those might be a couple of the areas that I'd be really eager to understand where people are coming from.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that. Next question. We've got a question about this. This is clearly directed at the transit budget. So there's a question about the spread in that budget. So for example, why a 2.9 to 37% span? So why do we have these very broad spans of potential increases or potential levies in the transit budget? This person is commenting that it seems like quite a distance. What's that all about?
Yeah. So first, I do apologize if it looks like I'm in the dark, but my office lights automatically go off at 6:30, and this is the building that I'm in. So if I am in the dark, I'm not tired in the dark. So the rationale there is really stemming from, if I go back in time a little bit, back in September of 2023, myself and my colleague Isabel Jasmine, Deputy CFO, we presented an update on the overall transit long-range financial plan, articulating the issues and the challenges that we were facing. As we move through the 2024 budget cycle this time last year, coming out of the adoption of that budget, the long-range financial plan working group, transit long-range financial plan working group, was structured and directed by council. Again, that was the mayor, Councillor Gower, Tierney, and Councillor Leeper, with myself, Isabel, and most of the senior leadership team at Transit. We've been meeting basically every 2 to 3 weeks since January of this year. All that work that we were doing is basically we were looking at every and any opportunity in terms of the different levers, we refer to it as levers, that we could do to help get to a sustainable transit funding. One option could just be what I would label as the easy button, just increase taxes to an extreme amount. That's the easy button. But what we're doing is we're looking at all the variables that we could do, and there's not one variable that's a solution. And when the mayor came forward in August and then endorsed by council the fairness for equitable share, that's really where that direction kind of stemmed from. That journey from September of last year to where we are today. And it basically gives staff the leverage to use more than one. So it had to give a spread. So right now, the projected shortfall for 2025 for transit is $120 million. So the tax levy of 2.9 to 37%, the rationale there is if we were just to do one thing, we would need a 37% transit levy increase to solve the $120 million increase. The other part of the direction was the fare component. And again, we gave a range on the fare side. So basically, we listed a minimum, and then the maximum was if we only did that one thing, that was the maximum. I don't think it's any appetite for council to endorse a 37% transit levy. So we're basically building a budget using all those various levers endorsed by the working group We continue to meet with the working group, and we'll continue to meet with them again before we actually table the budget on November 13th. But we needed a range of the upper and the lower limits, so we were not set by a certain limit per lever. We needed some flexibility to continue the work to be done for tabling on November 13th. So hopefully that provides a little bit of clarity in terms of the rationale behind those levers.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Cyril. We have a question about police budgeting. The question is, why can't budget items in the police budget be questioned or cut to reduce the need for the police to always get more money? There are items in their budget that could be cut, such as repainting the vehicles that are driving the costs of policing up, but they're not necessary critical items. Does anybody want to take a shot at that?
So I'll touch on the governance and the process side of the equation. So again, the Ottawa Police Services Board, as per legislation, they're accountable for establishing the budget for the Ottawa Police Services, and fundamentally is to provide effective and adequate policing for the City of Ottawa. Council adopts a direction or gives direction, endorses a direction for the budget. They recommend that the Ottawa Police Services Board endorse that direction and provide that direction to the service. The service will then build the budget. The service does hold a FAC, so their Finance and Audit Committee, so their budget will rise to their committee. So they will table their budget on November 13th with the city, or just before the city. They will go to their Police Services Board. They'll table the budget. Their budget will then go to their Finance and Audit Committee at some point in November. Then it will go back to their Ottawa Police Services Board, where then the board would either approve or not approve. If the board approves, then it rises up to council for final adoption on the December 11th. Sorry. Residents can go to the FAC or the Police Services Board to delegate and question those questions there at that forum.
Okay. Thank you for that. We do have another question on the police budget and on policing generally that I'll put out, and perhaps people will want to jump in on this. The question is, given City Council's 4 priorities don't include police, and that the Ottawa Police's own data show that they're still using force disproportionately on Black and Middle Eastern people, and haven't presented a plan to stop doing so, and given the OPS's own data also shows the OPS is disproportionately stopping Black people in traffic stops, will you vote against another police budget increase? So clearly this is a question for councillors. Do any councillors want to weigh in on that? All right, Councillor Johnson.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much for the question. And I think at last year's budget meeting, I said to the police service that, well, I followed someone who said, I wouldn't possibly ask the police service to do more for the City of Ottawa and not give them a budget increase. And I followed that by saying I would be absolutely comfortable in asking the police service to do more while not giving them a budget increase. So for the reasons that you've described, certainly those are good reasons. But I think further to that, there are many different ways that I feel that currently the police service have not been meeting the needs of College Ward residents. I think that we've seen, street violence and young people being murdered, and we're concerned about gun violence. We're concerned about the real opportunities for young people to, find a real livelihood and a real path forward that, College Ward residents and surrounding communities have brought to me as being, deeply underfunded. Certainly mental health, addiction, also chronically underfunded. And then even, things like road safety, street racing, routine enforcement of traffic laws, chronically under represented. So again, I think in the same way that we're asking many of our city departments to do a lot of work to demonstrate their outcomes and their results, while not offering more funding. I think that that is the same conversation that the Ottawa Police Service needs to be doing. I'm looking forward to the City of Ottawa Auditor General is doing an audit on their staffing pressures because there's a lot of existing officers that are on long-term leave, disability, staff turnover, and all of this creates a budgetary pressure for which we continue to get, oh, it's COVID, oh, it was the convoy. I'm not certain about that at this point. I've heard otherwise, but we need to have better understanding of that because of course labor is one of the biggest budget lines. So that's a concern for me. It's been a concern for me that we've seen new facilities be planned and proposed for Ottawa Police Service while we have in our own backyards, a facility rationalization exercise coming forward in January where the City of Ottawa is going to be looking at all of their facilities, seeing what is, repairable, what is renewable, and what isn't affordable, and likely divesting. So, yeah, I continue to be concerned about what feels like a double standard for the Ottawa Police Service. And it is difficult when, in fact, legislatively, the city councillors don't have, that legislative authority. So I will continue to likely vote against the police budget. I have to say I have been happy a little bit with having more frequent contact with some of their reorganization with the neighborhood policing model. But again, the bar was low. So we need to see, a lot of improvement in a lot of areas that are important to the people of College Ward. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Devine?
Thank you. Although my colleague pretty much just said everything that would have
Sorry,
come
I'm so
out of
sorry.
my
I
mouth.
went on way
No,
too
no, no.
loud.
You said it better than I'm about to. So hard act to follow. Listen, I don't like to assume that I don't like to say that I'm gonna vote against a budget before I see the budget. But I'm pretty sure I voted against the police budget for the first 2 years of my term. I guess, and not at all to disregard the concerns raised by the questioner. But I know that at least in Ward 9, what I'm looking always to see is effective delivery of services. And at least within Ward 9, whereas similar to my colleague, I have seen a bit of an improved response, at least in terms of communications between OPS and councillors. I still get the same volume of concern about inability to attack what in Ward 9 are some of the greatest concerns, whether that be traffic safety, speed racing, and quite literally that's what dominates the conversation in Ward 9. And I do believe that the solutions to at least the speed racing issue is less about us throwing more cops on the streets as much as us putting really, really strong pressure on the provincial government to change legislation. So sometimes the tools that I want to give to OPS are not tools for their budget as much as tools from the province that they can use for better punitive measures. I will say, however, to echo what Councillor Johnson was saying, I do find there to be a large gap in how various departments of the City of Ottawa speak to what their needs are and how OPS speaks to what their needs are, almost as if they're not following the same narrative that we're all following. And whereas on one hand, I'm excited about the prospect for greater understanding of local areas through this new decentralized district policing model, when at the same time I hear OPS say that their staffing needs for that new district policing model are for hundreds, literally, I think it's 500 new officers over the next 2 or 3 years. It just feels like they're not playing from the same book that we're all hearing other departments. So I will certainly be paying close attention to it. But like Councillor Johnson said, it's hard to throw so many resources in one direction where we can't throw them also in other directions that are just as needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor Kavanagh?
Yeah, just briefly. I know that one of the concerns I hear from my residents is that when a call is made, there's a lot of police and it seems overkill, like something that seems routine, or not, maybe not routine, but there's dozens of police present, and it, after the fact, after something has happened, and they question that, and I do too, and it makes you wonder about the resources, and the question they often ask is, I don't see them around beforehand. So that is something I hear, and that is one of the concerns that has been raised. And also the fact that when they call the police, especially the non-emergency line, they get told budget, is a problem, and it's like a PR exercise. And I think that really bugs people, that they hear this. So obviously they're lobbying residents, and I'm concerned about the way they're doing that, and I'll be concerned about their budget. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. All right, we have a couple of questions, one very specifically and one more general, but I'm going to ask the two of them sequentially just so that we get a bigger picture of this situation. So I'm going to start with a specific situation. This person is asking about the Belltown Dome. So the question is, we have lost Belltown Dome as an ice rink facility, the only rink in Bay Ward. The overwhelming opinion at the information session was that access to a rink is important. We were promised a meaningful consultation with respect to the future of the rink. We are already seeing impact of the loss of the facility. I'm the parent of a U9 hockey player. Parents have been told to expect morning weekday ice times that will conflict with school hours as a result of the ice shortages. This is really heading in a disappointing direction. If the city does not put sufficient funding into maintenance of aging facilities, in particular ice rinks, they will continue to erode beyond repair. Rinks are being built farther and farther away in newer neighborhoods, getting further from the city's goal of 15-minute neighborhoods, and are not accessible to many. So the comment, is it important to the community? It is important to the community to budget for an ice rink in Bay Ward, either a repair or replacement. So the question is, are repairs to ice rinks being fully budgeted to ensure other facilities do not suffer the same fate? Councillor Kavanagh.
Yeah. No, we had an information meeting about Belltown Dome. The issue was that the refrigeration mechanisms were worn out, and the cost was considered to be too high to replace them. So this is going to be like an outdoor rink with the cover on it, and that means a very short season. So they'll continue to use it, and but it will be, when the weather's cold outside, it'll be cold inside, because the thing is unheated, uncooled as well, by the way. And so once ice forms, they will have the rink, and obviously that shortens the season, especially with climate change. Yeah, it's a concern. It's a beloved place. It's an icon. It's very special, and we need to know what's happening with our rinks overall, because the trend is to get rid of the single pad because they're more expensive to operate than a double pad where you have, because of staffing costs. And that means Belltown Dome has a target on it. It was already a problem because of its age and the state of the building. Now, I have promised the residents we're going to have a more in-depth conversation, that we just had one information session. We're going to have another meeting, and so that will be coming up soon. I haven't got a date yet, but it will be coming up, and we'll be working on options. So, and one of the things that has been pointed out is we need ice rink in Bay Ward. And I know they don't like talking about being ward specific, but it's a long way to go to another rink. And so that's a problem. And I think everyone's going to discover that. It was supposed to be done just before the pandemic. They were going to look at the whole arena process and do an analysis. Well, that got stopped in its tracks. But believe me, they're going to be looking at rinks everywhere, and Belltown's just the first. But we do need ice rinks, and we're looking at a possibility. And one potential is at on Queensview at the current bus depot, which will be earmarked to be a recreation center in the future. So that would have to be a double pad there, along with other recreation facility. So that's what's being looked at, and it's been integrated as part of the secondary plan for Pinecrest and Queensview. It's a long way away though, because that bus depot is still operating. So what do you do in the meantime? It's very tough, because if we want 15-minute neighborhoods, we need rinks that are close by, accessible to everyone. So the meeting's going to come. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Johnson? Whoops. Councillor Johnson just dropped out of the meeting briefly, so we'll come back to Councillor Johnson when she returns.
Sorry, I
All
pressed
right.
the wrong button.
Oh, there you are.
I was getting excited because I could feel a teachable moment brewing. So to bore everyone to death, recreation facilities in outer urban wards. So you've got 3 councillors here that represent the within the green belt, outside the urban area wards. We aren't very well represented in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. We don't have a lot of new facilities planned. While those that are outside of the Greenbelt in the suburban areas do have a lot. And that is again related to growth. So when we talk about, having these facilities either be maintained or replaced, depending on what you're going to do with them, it's a different funding source. And outside the Greenbelt in Greenfield, they have more development charges. So it means that they can charge new developments and cash it in towards these new Parks and Rec facilities. In our areas, we can kind of do the same, but they calculate it they sort of split the calculation in half, and they say, well, of this new rec facility or of this renovation or this replacement, renewal, whatever word you want to call it, renovation is not the same as renewal, pardon me. So if you're going to renew the thing, then, how much of this is truly a benefit to existing residents and how much of this can still be charged to the new growth coming into the neighborhood. And it has been kind of recognized by Parks and Recreation staff in the last couple of reports looking at development charges that maybe the benefit to existing calculation is a little high. So it means that for, the things like the Belltown Dome or the things like the Pinecrest Rec Center, we're still trying to charge too much to the tax base, even though we're welcoming new development. So there will be more reports on that coming in the new year, where they're asking another consultant to kind of look at that calculation, that formula, just to double check it, because they want to make sure that for us that are inside these inside the Greenbelt that are seeing intensification through infill, that we're not getting short shrift on some of the dollars that could be put towards our parks and recreation facilities. That was a little garbled because I'm talking about a lot of stuff that I know, let's say 60% about, and the other 40% is still kind of lost to me. But all this to say, there's still a geographic impact to how we get to access good rec facilities, and it relates to growth. So we both need to welcome more growth into our outer urban areas so that we can have a new tax base, but we also need our development charges to be calculated so that new development money can go to existing rec facilities in a way that can actually renew them in the way that addresses that growth. and that calculation isn't perfect right now. So that's I don't know how Cyril thought I did, but I think I did not too bad, and certainly more to come.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Johnson. I'm going to go to Councillor Devine because he hasn't had a chance to talk on this yet, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Just to shed a little bit more light on that. So yes, the three of us councillors here are from the older established wards. And I know that I have, so for example, I have a small community center. It's really a field house in my ward. It's one of the older facilities. And I was told point blank by senior staff in Parks and Rec that when those kinds of facilities fail, and they are already close to end of life, but when they fail, that there is zero money in the, there's a very massive gap towards getting those kinds of things funded. And so fundamentally, you will have large areas of a city that do not have a viable recreation center. And yet, as Councillor Johnson said, in the outlying areas, you've got many brand spanking new, if not quite new, facilities. And the thing I find interesting about that, and I hope that you all understood Councillor Johnson's teachable moment there, because it really is imperative that we shift the formula of where the revenues that we collect from development, where they can be spent. Because not only is it fundamentally unfair, in my opinion, that for existing residents who live in these established areas, that they can't foresee the kind of new facility, upgraded facility that they see elsewhere in the city. So it hurts existing residents, but we have an official plan that is designed around attracting development as infill development. We have a plan that is seeking to intensify within the Greenbelt, but it's really hard to lure residents to our established areas to have that kind of development when we can't offer them the promise of seeing the kinds of facilities, schools, parks, playgrounds, community centers that they want to raise their families in. And so that's why they go out there. And until we change that formula, it's really hard for us to fulfill our official plan.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor Kavanaugh?
Sorry about that. I was in the Q&A mode. Yeah, no, just to wrap up, we've made it clear that when you're inside the Greenbelt and you're in older neighborhoods, you've got older facilities, in some cases, in our case, like over 60 years old, and you're waiting for dollars to either fix them up or they get, then they come to end of life. This is really problematic. And we also have a question here. You'll see it, Tim, about baseball diamonds as well. Same problem, recreation centers. I know when I visit the grandkids out in Barrhaven and I see smacking, brand new facilities, it's like, wow, it's Disneyland. And then you come back to your ward and you realize, well, we really don't have much in the way of rec centers. And by the way, Sean, I've got 2 field houses that I've teed up to be recreation buildings. And I've paid the money with my own cash in lieu to get architectural drawings, but the money's not coming in. Not yet. I'm going to keep at it. And these are in areas right near transit, brand new transit stations where population is going to increase. So we are going to have a bigger population in those areas. So there's a strong argument for these facilities. We just have to keep at it because it's common sense. We need better recreation infrastructure within the Greenbelt.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. We have a question about baseline. Is baseline still getting bus lanes? Seems to be in line with the city's goals of mitigating climate change and congestion. Also a much cheaper way to improve getting around the West End. So are we still getting baseline dedicated bus lanes? Councillor Devine.
Well, I very much appreciate the question. I'm sure you got a couple councillors here that very much appreciate the question. So the prospect and the future of bus rapid transit on Baseline is near and dear to many councillors' hearts. I believe this would run along Councillor Johnson's ward, to my ward, to Councillor Brockington's ward, and perhaps a little bit other than that. So all I can say is that when it comes to the city's long-term plans for transit, that Baseline bus rapid transit is still high up there. As far as I know, the city has very clear designs in place. That said, we are waiting for significant investment from the federal and provincial governments for that to happen. But and so it's certainly not happening this year as conceived. But what I want to mention, and the reason I put my hand up, is I think that we can likely try to achieve some of the benefits of having a dedicated bus lane on Baseline without having to fully implement the entire plan. There is enough room on Baseline right now. Currently, you've got 2 vehicle lanes in either direction, plus at least a sidewalk on one lane. If we wanted to, we could accelerate a pilot project to test out dedicated bus lanes on Baseline by eliminating one of those vehicle lanes in either direction. And in my opinion, and in the opinion of many, that right there could develop the business case for increased transit demand on Baseline. And it would force drivers to then make a choice of, well, maybe if I might want to take that bus on Baseline. I know there's some interest from OC Transpo to try that kind of pilot out. It may be the kind of short-term to mid-term solution that we could implement as a means of testing the waters. But absolutely, there is desire among councillors for getting some BRT on that corridor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Devine.
I just
All
wanted
right.
to mention quickly,
Oh,
sorry,
yes,
I had
please
my
go
hand
right
up
ahead.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just quickly, so today we in our office got word that we have been able to set a date. It's going to be October 30th at Ben Franklin Place for the open house for the Baseline and Green Bank reconstruction, which is being touted as phase 1 of the Baseline BRT. It's the affordable part. It's the 20 million part. The unaffordable part is the 400 million part that does the rest of the thing. But the transit improvements at Baseline and Green Bank include transit priority lanes through that intersection. And we were also successful in our office for advocating for an additional signal on Baseline at Baseline and Rockway, and that will also have some hopefully a bit of a transit movement as well, and obviously will create with the newest standards, both of those intersections will have Baseline and Green Bank will be a fully protected intersection, but Baseline and Rockway will also be a full signalized intersection with additional protections both across Baseline and Rockway, but also across the mouth of Southwood there. So that project is underway, but Baseline and Green Bank, once we get the web link for the Engage Ottawa page that supports that project, we'll be sharing more widely, but October 30th is the date for people to come on down and get excited about the improvements at Baseline and Green Bank.
Hey, thank you, Councillor Johnson. We've got a very general question about climate change. The question is quite straightforward, but probably not straightforward to answer. It says, what percentage of the city's budget is allocated to climate change?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So what we've been doing in the last 2 budget cycles, we're integrating the climate lens into the budget documents. In 2024, there was just south of $300 million worth of investments directly related to climate change, resiliency, or adaptation. So we continue to enhance that in the budget documents every year. But at this point, I don't have the figure for 2025. But we'll add that as part of the documentation once we table that budget in November 13th.
Okay, thank you, Cyril. All right, next question. The city collects taxes and fees and then spends that money around the city. Obviously, there will be areas which pay more than they receive in spending and other areas which cost more to service than they return to the city. Does the city know which areas are cash flow positive versus negative? What does the city do to encourage areas to increase their tax revenue and become positive contributors? How do we reward areas that already do pay more than they get? For example, better sidewalks, roads, parks, etc. So a question about, I guess, in one sense, tax fairness, but also about awareness of where the revenue is coming from and where the funds are being spent. Does anybody want to jump in on that? Cyril did address this a little bit earlier, generally. Councillor Devine.
Thank you for the question. So that's a question and a topic that I very much always am intrigued to hear about. As Cyril was saying earlier, there certainly would be challenges in laying out very, very specifically what dollars go to what ward. I think we could likely make broad calculations and estimates to try to get a sense of, for example, on a per kilometer basis, how much does it cost to pave a road? And therefore, if we are paving a road that is this long in that ward, we know how much that costs. But generally, what I'm intrigued about by that question is if we can reasonably calculate how much revenue do we collect from a ward, and there are wards that are big revenue earners. For example, Somerset Ward downtown is the biggest earner in terms of, correct me if I'm wrong, Cyril, but it's the biggest earner in terms of commercial property tax. And it's also a sizable earner in terms of residential property tax. Whereas a ward like Barhaven is a pretty big earner in terms of residential property tax just because of the high amount of people that live there. There obviously are wards that generate more. There are wards that generate less. And the reason I mention this is there absolutely are ways of, at least broadly, you might not get down to the dollar, but broadly laying out and understanding what parts of your city, what parts of your corporation, what departments of your corporation really have a greater gap between how much is taken in and how much is expended. And the question then becomes, if we were able to find out what parts of the city cost more than they make, and let's say there's a big differential, then what do we as decision makers do about that? Fundamentally, if you as a resident choose to live in an area of your city where it costs more to service you, does that arm us with information on how to make decisions on how to tax you, for example, if you are making that choice to live in an area and draw services? It is a fascinating question. There are consulting firms that are dedicated to nothing more than studying the revenues and expenses of municipalities to help municipalities make proper decisions about how to remain fiscally sustainable. I applaud residents for asking those kind of questions, and please continue to bring those pressures to us. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kavanagh.
Yeah, just quickly, the more people living in a smaller area means more tax dollars. They all pay property tax, and by the way, people who rent are paying property tax as well. Not visible, but they are. So just a reminder of that. So obviously Somerset Ward is probably the one that's earning the most, and probably uses the least resources. And I know they're short for things like parks, etc. But yeah, so that's the simplistic way to look at it. So the further out you are, more spread out, means we have to pay more for roads to get to you, and that costs money. So the better deal as a city is intensification, and you save a lot of money because you're not spending as much on infrastructure.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. We've got a few questions about transit, so I'm going to put a couple of them together because they're all related to a similar sort of vein of questioning. We had an answer earlier about the broad spread in potential increases around transit, transit fees, transit rates, that sort of thing. But a couple of people are asking things like, what are the chances that the transit fare increases by up to 70% or the transit levy increases by 37%? And tied with that, how successful has the city been in getting additional funding for transit from other levels of government? So maybe just broad questions about this business of dramatic increases to transit, and also what are the chances of that being mitigated by funding from other levels of government? Who wants to leap in on that? Councillor Devine, and then Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you. To answer the last part of that question first, how successful have we been in finding out whether or not we have secured new revenues from the provincial or federal governments? Unless I'm mistaken, I don't think we know, at least councillors know of any big news there. That said, as Cyril mentioned, we're going to pass a budget in mid-December, and that budget is going to be balanced, and that budget is going to be including a variation of the different levers. If, however, money from the federal or provincial governments come in after we pass our budget, I'm sure that it'll be warmly accepted, and that will hopefully have an impact on what we can do mid-year, let's say. But to answer the question about how likely is it that we're going to be pulling either of these levers to the full extent? So fundamentally, I don't believe that we as a council are going to pull any of the levers to the full degree. I certainly don't believe, nor would I support us pulling the lever of increasing fares by 75%. I think that would be counterproductive is the mildest way I can put it. Nor do I believe we're going to pull the lever of transit levy to the full 37%, even though I think that may be the most equitable way of going about it. Fundamentally, if we were to increase transit fares by 75%, I really think we would be shooting ourselves in the foot. We would be losing riders. Whereas there's arguments to be made that everyone benefits from transit, whether you use it or not. And so perhaps the fairest thing is to go about it through pulling the lever of transit levy most. But I'm pretty sure that what we're going to have, because there are a lot of different opinions around the council table, is we're going to see a bit of a smorgasbord of how to pull those different levers. We just don't know yet what we're going to end up with.
Okay, Councillor Kavanaugh.
This is not news. I wrote an op-ed piece 4 years ago about how we need to get funds from the federal government for operation and not just for capital. And that's right at the start of the pandemic. It was pretty obvious that we could not manage. There was going to be a drop in ridership. And so what's happening right now with the mayor's doing? Yeah, I hope we get those funds, and let's go after the province too. As somebody said, they used to pay a heck of a lot more for transit funding, and I'm talking operational. This is a benefit for all of us. This is about climate change. We need more people on transit. If you're complaining about the traffic on the Queensway, if we have more people and a more efficient transit system, I take it we need it to be good. That would help a lot.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. We have a few questions loosely categorized under the heading of housing, homelessness, some concerns about the cost of housing, obviously, in Ottawa, concerns about programs to help people who find themselves unhoused. Some general comments about that. How does this rank as a priority? What sorts of things is the city contemplating doing? Councillor Kavanaugh.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I missed that last part.
Oh, that's okay. I thought I saw your hand up, but maybe it was from the last.
I think it was from last time,
question.
sorry.
Okay, oh, no worries. Does anyone want to provide commentary on this question about the challenges of homelessness, the cost of
Oh,
housing?
yes, no,
Yeah.
I'll answer it. Sorry, I just missed the
Okay.
last part.
No,
Um,
that's okay.
I'm chair of Ottawa Community Housing. Obviously, housing is very important to the city, and I'm watching it very closely. Ottawa Community Housing has 15,000 units of social housing across the city, and yet there's a waiting list for 12,000. We are in desperate need, and I think we're going in the right direction. We just had an official opening for Gladstone Village. It's a drop in the bucket every time we do something, but it's moving towards it. We're going to have, by the time it's finished, over 1,000 units. We need way more. We're also doing a better job for homelessness with transitional housing facilities rather than putting people in motels. That is a big improvement, but we've got a long ways to go. Having decades of shortfalls towards nonprofit housing is more than catching up with us. It's absolutely horrible, and that is why you're seeing so many problems. Without that base of nonprofit affordable housing, and that can mean Ottawa community housing, it can mean co-ops, it can mean other forms of nonprofit housing. You need that base in every community. That's why landlords are getting whatever they ask, because people need a place to live and it's costing them a fortune. It's absolutely out of control. And the best way to deal with it is having more nonprofit housing. So that's what we're working towards. And with the help of the city, because Ottawa Community Housing is one step away from the city. It's owned by the city, but it operates as a corporation. We need to grease the wheels and get more housing built.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Johnson.
That was an excellent answer. And so I won't necessarily focus on the nonprofit side, although that's a very important side for the deeply affordable housing. Certainly there's still like a larger question of attainable housing that exists. And again, I have to come back to zoning. So we're undergoing the comprehensive zoning bylaw review right now, where the City of Ottawa is implementing its official plan. And one of the things that's being contemplated in that is to allow for up to 4 units as of right on any lot that's serviced by the City of Ottawa, and that, you know, can accommodate it under the rules. Considering 4 units as of right was what the City of Ottawa agreed to do as part of its bid for the Housing Accelerator Fund. We're contemplating it in the zoning bylaw, but we haven't fully agreed to it. It still is out for consultation and won't be voted on until 2026. So if you care about that particular idea, that's where you want to go talk about it. But again, trying to attach density for the broader attainable housing with funding for more deeply affordable housing is sort of how the federal government is trying to leverage creating more housing for all. The other thing that I think we're hearing about a lot from other levels of government is what Councillor Kavanagh mentioned earlier, which is density around transit stations. So, you know, the province has issued legislation to, you know, reinforce that priority. There's some language around that in some of the federal funding that's coming out as well. How is the City of Ottawa demonstrating that it's willing to go dense around transit stations, and how dense is sort of what we're also contemplating through the comprehensive zoning bylaw review. There are many areas where, you know, we have neighborhood protections in place through secondary plans right up against transit stations, and those kind of, you know, let's say 9-story limitations in some places are directly competing with some of the priorities of density around transit. So you can see that coming up at Gladstone Village, for example. It could be coming up around Sherbourne, for example. It could be coming up through Iris perhaps, although we don't really have the zone, we don't have the parcels that are big enough there. And we'll definitely be able to look at some density around Algonquin Station with 100 constellations. So trying to sort of talk to the other levels of government about specific density around that area. It's not only economically appropriate, but it also makes sense in order to incentivize people using the transit system. So I think that's a real potential for housing that's being seen across levels of government right now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Johnson. We've got a general question about the relationship between the budget and asset management plans. And the question is, how much would property taxes need to go up each year over the next decade to cover 100% of the projected shortfalls in all of our asset management plans? That's a pretty tough back of napkin piece of math. Do you want to take a crack at it, Cyril, or do you want to try and clarify that a bit?
Yeah, so I'll put some context to it. So again, we do what we call a citywide tax supported long range financial plan. In 2018 timeframe, it was the last time we did those plans. We did a rate infrastructure plan and we did a tax supported plan. And since that time, provincial legislation has changed. So that change started to come into effect in 2021, 22, 23 timeframe. And we will be coming forward in 2025 with new updated asset management plans and long-range financial plans to fund those plans. So the rules of engagement changed as per provincial legislation. When those plans were done last in 2018 timeframe, we identified a $70 million annual funding gap for tax supported assets. So that would be your roads infrastructure, recreational facilities, etc. So the plan that was endorsed by council at that time and what we're tracking to was to close that gap by 2026. So we are on track to close that gap after this next budget cycle, which we will be back to that level. Now, again, since that time, the rules of engagement has changed substantially. That's why we need to come back with a new plan in 2025. On the rate side of the infrastructure, we've closed that gap. So the rate, when I talked about earlier, the rate increases, combined rate increases is 4.4%. That's higher than your 2.9%. The rate program is extremely capital intensive. The majority of the investments in rate is for 30, 40, 50-year life cycle assets. That's why the rate is a little higher than your 2.9. And we've been funding the rate infrastructure, so there is no gap, again, prior to the provincial legislation change, which will be coming back again in 25 with new plans. So a little bit of context and nuance. One last piece of information, which councillors have heard me say this at committee and council numerous times. A 1% property tax increase generates approximately $20 million. So if I take that 2.9 property tax increase and go to 3.9, that approximately gives an additional $20 million coming in, just for context.
Okay, thank you very much, Cyril. We've got time probably for maximum 2 more questions. So again, if you have not managed to have your question addressed tonight, this is not the end of the road. We've got the list of questions, so we'll certainly make sure those get submitted to the budget process. But you can also provide your comments through Engage Ottawa. And of course, you're always welcome to engage with your councillors' offices. Send us an email and let us know your thoughts and the things that you'd like to see prioritized through the process this year. We've got a question about bike infrastructure. It's a request, it's a plea really, asking that councillors push for more protected bike infrastructure. They're saying the pathways are nice for getting downtown, but people also need to get around their neighborhoods by bike and kids need to bike to school. So are councillors willing to push for more bike infrastructure this year? Councillor Kavanagh.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I live it. I use my bike a lot and I see our weak points. Definitely. There are some positive. We're getting better. I'm watching Scott Street get completed, but then there's gaps, and some of them are pretty scary. We do need more infrastructure, and it's for getting across the city. I applaud when we get it done. We do have some good stuff, but we got to fix those gaps. And some of the biggest gaps are intersections, very dangerous intersection. As Lane is talking about that intersection at Greenbank and Baseline, well, I can understand it's going to be expensive, because to make that safe will be quite the task. And that's what happens. But that's where it's important. We've got funding for bike lanes on Richmond Road, but we don't have it for the intersection. So there's a gap. So that's the kind of thing we're facing. That's treated separately. So yeah, we'll keep pushing for more. You can count on it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Devine.
I just want to throw some quick context on that. Whether it's talking about more funding, more investment in cycling infrastructure, or more investment in transit, even if you are not a cycling user, if you're not a transit rider, I hope that you can support these kinds of investments, because in the end, they really will go towards helping address what is a common issue for a lot of Ottawans right now, which is congestion. As I was driving home today in traffic, I heard a radio poll that said that, and this was not a scientific poll, but that 80% of respondents to this poll don't necessarily feel safe walking or cycling on Ottawa roads, which means that we're not creating the conditions to incentivize people to use vehicles other than their car. And the more that we just continue that pattern, the more we're going to see people relying on that, and all of our problems will exacerbate. So I hope that residents can support us when we do push for these kind of investments. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Devine. And I think that brings us to the end of our available time for questions tonight. I really appreciate everybody hanging in, posting your questions. We tried to get to as many of them as possible and a variety of the questions that you posted. It's really great to see people engaged and asking such clear questions about the direction we're going with the city's budget. So it's much appreciated. And I want to thank again Cyril Rogers and the rest of city staff for coming out tonight and providing support. This is time away from their families to come and help you guys understand what's going on with the city budget, and it's deeply appreciated. We're going to give the councillors a last chance here to throw in a couple of words if they like to cap off the evening. And again, I want to remind those of you who have joined us tonight that if you wish to provide more feedback, you can always do that again through the councillors' offices, sending us emails, and through Engage Ottawa. Through the 2025 budget consultations process. This process is really just beginning. This session was to try and provide you with some good information and a broad range of information, but there are many other ways for you to get involved and for you to make your voices heard. So I encourage you to continue to be involved and to provide us with feedback. All right, councillors. Councillor Kavanagh's got her hand up, so we're going to start there. Do you want to say a few words to round out this evening?
Thanks, Tim. I just keep forgetting to put it down. But
it's an advantage.
But since it's up, I'll use it. I just want to thank everyone for taking the time. That's a very good number of people that we've had, and excellent questions and lots of thoughtfulness there. There was a comment that you weren't allowed to make comments, but I think comments did get in there, and you still can continue to make comments and you can continue to treat this as a consultation. And that was in the description of this evening. And the Q&A, I think, was a bit of a misnomer, because we are consulting. And if you do not feel that you got your opinion in there, please write to us. I'll put my email again in the Q&A. Somebody in my office just queuing up. Barb, please do that. We'll continue to listen. But I saw some good stuff there and appreciate all the efforts. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead, although it's always dangerous to let Councillor Devine have the last word, but I'm sure it'll be fine. No, I'm joking. I just like to tease him when he's on mute. So yeah, I don't have much to say. Except for, yeah, ditto to thank you so much for coming. And again, this is, the budget is always a challenge because, for any of us to make a change as counselors, we have to move a motion where we create our own, we say we're going to move money from one place to another. We can't just increase a particular budget line without finding the funds for it within the same envelope. And although that is, fair in the sense that we can't all just decide to spend our money everywhere, it is challenging when we're asking people to engage on this particular item because it's somewhat fixed. So I really do hope that you'll continue to engage throughout the year. The master plans are really where a lot of the sausage gets made. We've got the transportation master plans coming up, next year in 2025 before the next budget. And it will be really important for a lot of the questions that we've heard today, to have those voices as part of that transportation master plan wrap up in the new year. So I do hope you'll follow along with that one. And again, always a pleasure to share space with my council colleagues and to Cyril and his team, and to Tim, a big thank you for getting us, keeping us on track, and always a pleasure to work with you as well. So thanks to everyone, and I hope you'll stay in touch.
Thank you. Councillor Devine.
Thank you. Very much appreciate having so many people participate. If I can leave you with one thing, is I really want you to continue urging your councillors and the mayor, because you all are represented by a council and you're all represented by the mayor. Let us know the kind of city you want, and let us know what you want us to do to give you the city you want. Around the council table, we make a lot of assumptions, and we make a lot of assumptions publicly. We say things like residents don't want this or residents can't do that. I don't think we do a lot of polling on that. In the comments I heard tonight, there was a lot of, I want this, I want more of this, I want more of this. And I'm going to assume that you're all smart, reasonable people, and you know that if you want more of something, you got to pay for it. So I would really, really love to hear. I don't want to make assumptions about what my residents want or what other residents want, but I want you to continue telling your municipal leaders what you want and what you're willing to do to get what the city that you want. I won't prescribe what that is, but by all means, please let us know.
Okay. Thank you very much, councillors, and thank you to everyone who turned out tonight. We appreciate your participation. That wraps up our meeting for this evening. Take care and have a good rest of the night.
Good night,
Goodbye,
everyone.
everybody.